This is Tristan McGough, your philosopher at large. And today, in Selfology 101, we are treating the seventh of the 7 ideas, which are pristine cognitions of the intuition which we all innately have. And this 7th of the ideas is called PAROUSIA. Of course, we could also call it the perfected, or the master, or the adept. That is the one who has attained that psychonautical balance in the world where they're able to generate part of the ongoing ontology, the creative genesis of this world in a conscious, meaningful, significant, purposeful way. They contribute to the world, as we left off the last time, when the pilgrim, the psychonaut, gets to a point where they've attained some measure of personal balance and interpersonal harmony with the world around them, their life world. And that includes the natural world in all its sentiency as well as the human dimension. And we mentioned there that there are certain fruits that obtain after cultivating them in the gardens of merit, the gardens of happiness, the gardens of eudaimonia. And that is the self which really is going into itself and discovering for the first time as a conscious being that its reflective power is not only one of being the observer, but is incidentally, that is, co-founded and at the same time, is an agency of action. So the agent is not only a passive witness to the world, but is an active participant. And the last time that we spoke, and we talked about these gardens of self-cultivation and their fruits, and these, of course, are essentially what occur in the constitution, if you will, of happiness, or what we philosophically call eudaimonia, where the divine merges with the human in order to manifest through the creature, that is the body, certain harmonic effects within the world, moral, aesthetic, in terms of truth and meaningfulness in life, as well as vibrancy, skillfulness, and power and ability to effect change in the world as an action agent. So that happiness itself is composed of several components, and we discussed those at length previously. But just to summarize, they're the empowering will, the enlightening mind, the endearing heart, the feeling aspect of every individual conscious being, and the emancipating life. And when these are actually generated in such a fashion within the individual of self-transformation, it's dependent upon that agent's interaction with the interdependent whole of which they are a part. So what the psychonaut learns by going into themselves, if you will, is really going into the being of the universe in a conscious fashion. And we had mentioned that that results in 5 contributions of the awakening consciousness to the socioverse. And so, to the large sense of community where that individual who's attaining psychonautical balance, a balance, of course, of spirit or consciousness, and of soul, that is of self-consciousness, and of soma, that is of other consciousness. That kind of balance which is attained is unity, and that's something that is self-evident to the individual in the same way that each of us has a truth sense, or if you will, an alethic sense, that is able to discern falsity from truth. and of course you can always prove that quite easily, is because you can always take, for instance, a mistaken perception and have it corrected. If, as an example, which is traditional, there's a coiled rope in the room and the room is dark and well shaded, and that appears as if that's a coiled serpent, and I don't know that, I may react to the image that I already have as an imprint of what a snake looks like, and with all my genetics as well as my reactive training, having went down the hall of beliefs, I instantaneously start. However, somebody throws on a light and I instantly see that it's a coiled rope, immediately any kind of residual fear that I, my emotions, my body might have experienced is instantly dissolved. The analogy of light and dark is used very often, particularly when the psychonaut is learning how to attain that particular balance in life that allows them to generate happiness, which is actually internal harmony and external harmony and harmony with the greater world. Because besides the outer scape, in which appear to us the various objects of the world, and the inner scape, where we have our beliefs and our views and our images and our fantasies and our fears, the entire cognitive array, including your affects, everything you feel, your resolutions and your intentions, everything you will, and everything you do. All your doings, your actions, through vivations. All these things together are all together within this cauldron, which we call consciousness. And consciousness accommodates them all. Consciousness accommodates intelligence, sentience, vivations, and conscience. So that is what existence is made of. We change ourselves in terms of self-transformation, and where we can utilize these senses, this sense of truth, this sense of beauty, this sense of goodness, and this sense of power that comes from skill and means. We generate that by pivoting to the secret treasures of our own consciousness, which accommodates all the things which we have deliberately or over time and without much vigilance cultivated. And these can be good formations such as clarity, moral rectitude, any of the intellectual or moral or affective virtues that you've been able to identify throughout your life, and there are many. All of these go into constituting the precious resource, which in Buddhist terminology is the Sambhogakaya. The Sambhogakaya is the body of enjoyment. It's actually under the principle of felicity, which we've spoken of before, and that allows each of us to have a sense of internal balance and harmony, something which we have experienced as happiness, when the feeling side and our thinking side and our willing side and our activity side all converge in a harmonic way in order to create a sense of balance and bliss in our personal lives. Reflective consciousness pivots towards self-composure, and that self-composure actually from will generates confidence. And as we spoke of with mind, its clarity, and just as its calmness in terms of feeling, and its contribution because of skill in relation to the faculty of evasions, of doing. In terms of pivoting to the consciousness, it's all based upon, of course, what we as agents, as well as passive witnesses of our experience can do. It's all according to cause and effect, which is karma. Karma actually is another word for cause and effect, and we spoke of 3 types of causation before. I'll refer to them again in a moment, but for the moment, let us take a look here in terms of the karma verse. That is, taking a look at this universe as an integrated causal system. We realize that there's a holistic karma in which everything within this universe participates, even if a galaxy tears away far enough into the ever-expanding physical universe so that it will never be able to be in communication with our part of the universe because of the local limit of 186,000 miles per second limit of the speed of light. So you can even have parts of the local universe that are going to tear off from one another, but that doesn't mean that they're not part of that universe and part of the holistic karma, and integrate in such a fashion that we can even say that part of it separates from itself. Well, besides the physical karma, which we're familiar with on the macroscopic scale, like when we're playing a billiard game or we're cooking up dinner, we realize there's cause and effect that's there. But we're, as individuals, experiencing much more than the physical causation of anything. Any physical causation always has the individual's karma that is participating within that individual event, those physical events of the material plane called the physical karma, as well as the holistic karma. The interesting thing here is, of course, you may be cooking dinner with someone. Well, you're part of a collective karma at that point. You may be cooking for your family. Well, the effect, the result you want to attain is providing a healthy, nutritious meal for your family. It's something that they're going to enjoy. So that's part of the collective karma that you're all sharing. However, we're all bound into this particular global greater space and time and part of a historical karma. What is occurring right now within the world at any given moment is part of the resultant effects of the causes that have went before. We all share in this at a global level, and it vibrates in each of us, in each of our areas differently because of local karma. So we see that there's a whole set of causes that go into the production of any given morpha, that is, any given thing event. 3 types of causation, just to remember. The kind that we're going to focus on very much today is epistic, generation. That's the intra-agent causality. That is where I create my own conditions for happiness from my own internal states, which happen to be the enduring self. That's the dimension that we want to call intention to. That's the continuing self. That's the one you wake up to every morning. You wake up to anytime you take a nap in the day. It's your continuing or enduring self. Then there's the volitional self. That's the self that wills. And of course, here's your narrating self, and that's the self that thinks. Your emotional self is your feeling self, and your organizing self is the unifying self that takes all of that intra-psychic dimensionality and makes it one, so that it's your emotions, it's your thoughts, it's your will, etc. The way that we touch this world directly, of course, is through our bodily self. It's that self which is the living self of the dynamic world. Our perspectival self is the highest self of our consciousness, and that is the self in which we observe the lived world. We see what we're passively receiving as well as what we're actively doing at the time. And the social self is the self that's really in between. The bodily self and the perspectival self of consciousness that we have as self-consciousness is that reflective capacity we have to mirror our experience through fictions, through fantasies, through mirrors of the mind that reflect the way that we believe we're perceived by others. Because as we awoke to this world as infants, we were already being addressed. And our nascent ego was called into identity in terms of opposition with the other, which was addressing us in a personal fashion. So it was addressing us as a social self. So it's here that we have the ecologue taking place. The ecologue, which is the dialogue which is taking place between you as a body with the rest of physical manifestation. It's also you as a social self, which is just as connected in the higher, subtle realms as your body is to this realm. My body is anchored in a chair. It's holding a pointer. It's gazing about the room through a set of material, corporeal, eyes, and optical system. All of that's the bodily self. But it's composed of all these elements. It relies on food in order to sustain the health of every individual cell within this bodily self. Well, in the same way, on the psycho level, that is the psychical level of the soul, we are a co-foundational product, as I was just indicating, and attain our egohood in opposition to the other. It is there that we have what I've termed the epistemic relation, subject and object. It's always co-founded. In phenomenology, this is Husserl's universal subject-object correlation. So every time you've got an object, you've got a subject that's beholding it. And the case with human beings is we tack on a lot of content to that fundamental psychical structure. That fundamental psychical structure we are speaking of in terms of the individual intrapsychic self, but in the same way the body takes its organic being from the chemical compounds around it, so does the social self, that subtle psychical self, the psyche, the soul, the self-consciousness, inhabit a world in which it has a similar dependency. And the food of that psychical world is the socioverse. It is where beings have a direct consciousness correlation to one another, and what they do within their internal social selves does affect the psychical realm in the same way that if I were to toss a stone in this physical realm into physical water, it is going to create physical ripples. That is due to me being an active agent in this world. However, even if I were a passive agent, and I should sit alone on a mountaintop, on total samadhi, and the world disappears from me. My body is still part of the world. It's still a creaturely aspect of physical karma. In parousia, and incidentally, parousia means second coming, and it's used in Christian theology to refer to the second coming of Christ. Now, if you're familiar with self-realization, either from Yogananda or some self-realization interpretation of Vedanta coming from the east to the west, you're going to understand that the depth of a human being is much more than just its physical apparatus. And I had indicated this in what was formerly, I termed, the mythopoeic archetypal message. Today we're going to focus on the second coming, the way it's referred to by Yogananda and those of a universalist frame of mind, and seeing that the parallels between the East and the West amount to taking different views of a mountain, one from the south and one from the north, as it were. However, if we put that all together within our octahedron, we see that from deity through creature and human, there is an axis that unites it all. And that is the identifying self that we referred to in terms of our 10-dimensionality of self. Now, what parousia is in terms of self-realization is mastery of Maya. And Maya is the world of measurement. It's the world that's metered out. It's the world of matter. However fine that matter is, however refined and subtle that matter becomes, even higher and more refined than quarks and any other subatomic particles so far identified. So I wanted to take that idea of mastering Maya with the complete human being. The human being as not only Dyson, not only as somebody who is in this world, but also as creature, as part of this physical structure of the world, and sharing an evolutionary past with all of creation, right to the first protile. And deity, the potentiated, unfulfilled, fantastic fruits of self-realization through self-cultivation. It's where the human being transcends being merely a human being, and like Friedrich Nietzsche indicated, becomes an overhuman, something that's beyond humanity. Mankind, I believe he once said, is something that must be mastered. And that's precisely the idea of mastery, whether it's the adepts in the esoteric circles of the Eastern tradition, or the adepts in the Western tradition through the Eleusinian and the Egyptian, the Hermetic, the Mithraic, all the other mysteries, the Druidic, and so many more, that passed along these lineages of what the big picture is and how an individual transforms themselves in that big picture in a conscious, deliberate, meaningful, purposeful, and lasting, enduring fashion. And so taking these three categories of emanation which includes the identifying self, and the advancing self, which is the self which is always perfectly in the present of its presence. The one presence is presence as your presence and every other individual presence. And so what happens when we're looking at the three various kinds of causality, the intra-agent causality, where I create my own states and conditions of consciousness, interagent causality, where I am able actually to create or have some kind of impact or influence on an outer world, whether it's a physical world through the bodily self or the psychical world through the social self, or at a much even higher and refined perspective as the perspectival self, the observing self, and creating from there a condition in the universe that alters, even at that very high state, as I and any of us assume new perspectives on reality. So that's what this is all about. It's mastering the reality around us on all those dimensions, so that as a human being, we're discovering what this archetypal message is. Now, the message actually is something that we're going to talk about and unfold here in a bit. But for the moment, as a human being, and looking at whether it's the emanation level of causation, or the generation level, or the production level of causation, we're seeing that all of these are integrated in that unique creature called the human being, who is composed not only of mentality and materiality, but monicity. Monicity is where it is impossible for me not to be innately conjoined to greater being. It's impossible for me to exist independently of everything else around me. Monicity, on the positive side, is what binds us all together as part of infinite being. So we're take journeys as our conscious selves, as a conscious being, as cognos, which is the one view of the self, of course, and we move as pilgrims then, as psychonauts, on through the various levels of experience until we learn to understand there's a pattern to it, and that we can uncover what actually we first discover as the message. Now, the message itself is composed of 7 elements. The message, and now you'll notice an interesting turn. I've used the color green because I'm focusing on this solar, this central, this mental level, which is what really begins to permeate the entire octahedron, if you will, of the psychonaut, of the pilgrim, as they move into parousia. And this second birth, this spiritual birth that takes place within the life of that awakened individual, where they're self-reflective and they realize that they can generate their own karma, their own causal sequence, by their own actions. So they need to attain, we all need to attain a point of mastery in which we're in control of our choices before we make them. It sounds contradictory, but that's part of paradoxical logic. It's where, in order to attain what it is that you envision, you already have attained it in terms of your own mental vision. That is, if you will, the will at work. It's not a belief in itself, it is a willingness itself, which is the central mechanism which is used as the method by which one eventually When I used it before in terms of referring to this particular individual as a regent. But as a leader, using another term here, that will supersede it. That leader is a demonstration of method. And method basically is magic. It's where you use a recipe, a plan, a formula, some kind of stepwise accomplishment where you are going to gain control of whatever it is that you decide is the purview or the domain of which you should have control. And the hardest thing to control, of course, is one's own self. And that's why Buddha said it is much more difficult to conquer oneself than it is to conquer an adversary. Very true. Awakening to oneself, you realize all the combatants that are on your own turf of consciousness, and that you want to eventually become a model of the best kind of archetypes which are represented in our myths or become motives within our stories. It's something we can model our behavior on, and where the term here, lover, is somebody who actually is in love with the world in the poetic sense, the romantic sense of Byron and Keats and Shelley. There's a love affair that takes place between one's awakening consciousness as you begin to adore the world. And as we had spoken of previously, that's one of the ways in order to gain self-composure and that sense of calmness is to have an appreciative feeling that allows us to open up to the beauty of the world and to adore it. So the model and the method are complemented by the meaning. That is, the message has not only a model, an archetype, which it embodies. The message itself not only has a method that it demonstrates and which it unfolds, and which if one utilizes as a recipe to reality, becomes the significant purposes by which your understanding of the world can build maps and pictures. And that's what a myth is. I use the word myth here, and it's a mark. It's like when a sailor is out at sea and they see a particular rock formation, and that's a myth. That's a landmark. That tells them where they are. And in the other sessions of Selfology, we'll go into the notational set and all the various types of meanings. We already referred to it when we spoke of the idio meaning, right? We all have our personal meanings, and there's the connotation and the denotation. And every time that we rethink and redefine something, it's a re-notation. We'll speak of all this at a later session in the more intermediate phases of this continuing seminar on Selfology. However, in Selfology 101, we're just taking a 40,000-foot overview. So the message that's unlocked in PAROUSIA concerns the model, the method, the meaning, as well as the means. And this is where skillful means becomes absolutely imperative. You may well intend to help someone, but unless, of course, you develop the precise ability to know what they need and then to provide that, it's impossible really to eliminate distress or promote happiness. So you need to have the right means. Now, when you've got a message that's been unlocked and you realize, as a leader and a lover and a hero and a seer, you know what things are, you yourself realize the miraculous taking place all around you. As you unlock your own model as you unlock the methodology to your own success, as you unlock the various meanings around you, and as you unlock the means to establish the future beneficial results that you envision, then you become part of that miracle that is awakened. Besides appreciating the miracle, the astounding configuration of the three types of causality that are creating our spiritual, solar, and somatic existence, we have the miraculous ability from within to change the world. And that's what parousia is. It is by itself. It is the self by itself. Because there is nothing here that is not anywhere. And anything that is here is everywhere. That doesn't mean local conditions and local karma and local empirical situations. What it means is that everything from those local empirical situations all the way up through the more refined levels of our existence, where we exist as well as unifying souls or psyches, integrating our self-conscious experience, and as participants within the one consciousness, because consciousness is, as a ground, absolutely clear and knowing. It is not presupposing anything. It is not the same thing as intelligence, or sentience, or vivacience, or conscience. Consciousness is clear and knowing. So as parousia, what occurs is the archetypal message becomes recovered. It is recovered. And the way that it's recovered, as the person who first of all as a psychonaut awakened to that fact, is that you start to put these virtuous fruits into a basket of merit, which is termed the eschaton. And that is the enduring, lasting spiritual part of the awakened qualities of your intuitive senses and of your pure consciousness. The methods by which the individual psychonaut attains a state of parousia where you are filled with deity. Now you'll notice that I've had green indicating, of course, what is occurring within the individual, within you as the individual, as a trigonic self of spirit, that is consciousness, of soul, that is of self-consciousness, and as soma, that is as other consciousness, consciousness of the other. I've shown that in terms of the green. You'll notice that parousia is located here because this is the point in which finally that linkage between spirit, soul, and soma has opened along that axial self, that axial channel of identity, so that the individual is not only awakened, but is actualizing the potential for the benefit of all. And so there's a perfusion that takes place. There's a second coming. There's a second time you're born. As Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens once remarked, the two greatest days in your life are the day you're born and the day you learn why. And the day you learn why is the day you awaken. And sometimes the awakening, learning why, is sort of like sleep. Some awaken more quickly than others. But when you do, that's manifested as parousia, the second coming, being born again. You actually are awake to your own awareness. Even though you are a creature, and that's part of the miracle. That's part of this threefold causation that allows you to participate within emanational, generational, and productional causation all at once. That's the miracle. The miracle isn't a suspension of these laws. The miracle is the actualization of all these laws and principles. And so PAROUSIA recovers this. The truth that is lost. That's why in Pratyabhijna, Shaiva Kashmir philosophy, the whole idea of Pratyabhijna, of recognition, of recognizing, of recognizing who you always were. That's part of, that is the identifying dimension of the 10-dimensional self. It's where that doesn't go away along this entire axial side. And it takes the psychonaut, the willpower, to discipline themselves, to turn their inner states into transformative energies. And why? Because they're willing to attain happiness rather than suffering. Everyone gets motivated at some point to eliminate suffering. And so in this karma verse of cause and effect, you're simply, as a good magician, learning the method to lead. First of all, yourself. Buddha says, be a refuge unto yourself. Who else is going to do it, right? You got to lead yourself. And once you lead yourself, you become a leader of others. And you do this through the path of intent. You have, as conscience, always the ability to intend something, to deliberately will it. You have the power to make an interpolation, to enter the world and search yourself in it, and to create new causes, new effects, new consequences, new results. You attain, personally, your own autonomy or sovereignty, dignity by doing that. But also, as we spoke of on the PAROUSIA cross, you establish virtue. Now, virtue is part of the social self that has been established within the institution of society, where the individual's power, whatever it is, in mathematics and science, or in pedagogy and teaching of children, whether it's as a professor or as a computer scientist, geneticist, it doesn't matter. The virtues that are attained within compiling all that knowledge within an individual is their own personal biography. It is stitched together by the power of will. It is unique. It is absolutely idiosyncratic. It is not something that is ever replicated. That kind of virtue becomes part of the socioverse, and that's what really creates a sense of increasing speed in, if you will, anthropological evolution. Take a look at history, you'll see how rapidly our knowledge has increased. It has doubled in certain fields at this point every couple of days. So it is important to understand that we are always creating things anew. This is part of our intellect, which is, of course, our intelligence, that is ever creating new insights into what can be done, because we are participants as means, that is, as bodies here within the world, in which, first of all, we follow our instincts, but later on, we initiate our own actions. And what that allows us is to become an exemplar of power and not the absence of power. Just as when we actually attain the sagacity for ourselves and a wisdom that is transmittable to others through culture, we see things as they are, and that is knowledge rather than ignorance, which is the absence of that knowledge. In other words, instead of living in darkness, you throw on the switch and the lights come on. When it comes to being the lover, you're loving through non-attachment. If you're loving through attachment, you're loving someone from your point of view alone and your affective, emotional needs alone. And that is a definite wall between you being able to be interpenetrative with someone else's psyche. It is important, therefore, in any love situation, not to be attached in terms of your own circumscribed predilections, your own particular biases and discriminations. So you become a lover, somebody who can love openly, kindly, directly, and conscientiously for the other. And you become a seer, somebody who has knowledge, and a leader, cultivating virtue that is transmittable integrity or dignity that is passed on. It seems like an intangible, but look at any of your cultural institutions. This is what we're speaking of. We're speaking of the power of interpolation, where we as beings work the world in a magical way and we impose our vision upon it. If all human life were extinguished from this planet and an alien were to land in the future and they looked at a building, if they're configured anything like us and move anything like this, they will understand instantly what a doorway is, what it means, and that it was interpolated, it was created by the action, the insertion, the agency of thinking individuals. In other words, a doorway has a meaning. It's a symbol, it's a sign of what is. And what the adept or the master eventually understands is, and they do this through meditation, that's the way it begins, because that's where you focus your power on the inner scape. You close down the outer scape, move to the inner scape, launch to the greater scape. And meditation is the basis of doing that. A master learns how to master their choices. And the way they do that is through control. If you are always reacting to external circumstances as a reactive being without taking that reflective time to allow you as a controlled consciousness to respond rather than react, then you're simply using your beliefs and your affects, sentiments, prejudices, fears, hopes, dreams, whatever it is, to do the choosing for you. True, you will choose it, but you're choosing what is an affordance, what is ready to hand within your own inner scape, rather than understanding that you, if you're unattached, can choose whatever you like to do. You don't have to react to a situation, a person, a word, or even your own thought in a causal effect kind of way without reflection. Because as a reflective being, we are always capable of using our will to pivot to that reflexivity. That's where you hear the constant admonitions to be vigilant or mindful, being awake to one's own awareness. So we're seeing that in terms of the parousia, the second coming, there are particular bases and paths and fruits by which one develops the skill, the autonomy, virtue, etc. Sagacity, wisdom, the care, the love, the bliss, all of that is developed in parousia. How is that developed and where does it develop from? We've touched on it before. It's present seeing the present. It's all present. There's nothing here that is going to go away. Things are going to change. Even science says energy and matter is neither created or destroyed, only changed. Well, that's what causation is. On all the levels, there's a change that's taking place. In emanation, it's an ontogenic change that's taking place. There's a change from a potential state to an actual state. But it is not the way that it is produced in this world in what we consider a linear or a sequential fashion. It's all at once. Emanation is the subtending of the entire universe, all at once. And so that is the one presence. It's the unity of being and conscious being. This is what parousia discovers, uncovers, recovers. This is what the psychonaut is driving themselves toward as a seeker, as a pilgrim. They're looking for that one presence in their own life. They want that presencing, that experiential presence within their own lives, so that there's an end to suffering and there's the attainment of happiness. This is the gift of the universe to each of us. And the presencing involves, of course, the present moment. It's this time. It's the present object. It's what is presented to you, to I. It's the presentivity. What is presentivity? Well, it's the potential of being to become present. It's presentness in terms of a quality. We know what to be present is. It's a quality. It's a qualia. That's what presentivity is. And it was a potential before it became an actual. And that's what you model then, right? In terms of model and method, etc., and meaning. You decipher the meaning of the presented object, you find truth. The present moment, the presented object, the quality of presentivity. And there's the presenting. In this particular instance, I'm presenting something to you, and you're having it presented. So it's the process of becoming present. Altogether, all of these converge in this concrete world as a presentation in the manifold manifestation of measurable maya. What we're doing is we're carving up, we're segmented every moment. That, of course, is always continuous. The segments may appear to be artificial, but they are all causally interconnected. We mentioned that the way that mastery is attained is through meditation. Meditation means to be at the center. It's a Latin word. And when one meditates, you are first of all recollecting your consciousness. You are allowing the various rays of consciousness that otherwise seem to radiate toward the sphere of existence in every manner possible. None of that's going to go away. However, what you are going to do is you are going to close down the sensory environment, the 10 senses, to the outer world, the outer scape, and your 11th sense, if you will, the sense of mind that you have, is no longer going to be attending to these empirical things. Rather than you turn into the inner scape through the contemplative cycle. And when you go through this contemplative cycle, there are 12 stages. You start off in elation, and that is the point where you're at. You let your head catch up to where your arse is at. You sit yourself in a chair, you get yourself comfortable, you reflect and pull up the bootstraps of your existence, looking at your past and letting it dissolve into the moment, letting the future be unproduced and fresh as it happens, and not attempting to read anything into it. There's a whole cycle that takes place in terms of the contemplative cycle, or bhavana krama. And the krama itself is the cycle that takes place from 1 to 12. And you begin by, as I said, pratahara. You abstract yourself once you get yourself in the chair, and once you have the necessary virtues that have allowed you to even sit in that meditation chair, so that you're not discordant in mind. You're not distracted by any exterior influence. You're able to focus clearly, be mindful and vigilant, and, if you will, to launch off into inner space, into the expansive skies of pure consciousness. And you first do that by abstraction through pratahara, or sense withdrawal. Then you do next is you are able to focus attentively on one thing. The Buddhists have 9 wonderful steps for attaining that. And I suggest on any of these that, as you will notice, there are references to the traditions, whether they're Indo-Tibetan or other traditions of the West, that you will find correlations to. The ones that I'm using here are elation, abstraction, attention, which is focusing purely on an object, considered concentration. Meditation actually begins here at dhyana, where you have 4 levels, 4 jnanas, that are allowing you to ascend, so that eventually you get beyond the discursive, linguistic, superficial level of your inner consciousness, where you are naming things, you are imagining things, you are pulling up images, you are worrying about things. It all goes as you ascend into dhyana, where you attain a totally equanimous state, which is alive and vibrant with illumination, the brilliance of intelligence unleashed from empirical concerns. And that's when you are absorbed in samadhi. And from here you move to a unique condition of the alone to the alone, as Plotinus referred to it. It is kavalya in the Hindu tradition, and that is astriction. You are completely constricted as an isolated unity of consciousness, but at that same time as that unity of consciousness, you are participating in pure being. This is paraprajna. This is the height of wisdom that is attained by the psychonaut repeatedly through this contemplative cycle that becomes a spiral of transformation as they mount from the Ausa cross, which we mentioned of space, time, entity, and cause, onto the PAROUSIA cross, where these virtues of love and care are established. So on the way down on the Prajnagadjic arc, as you had a Prajnapampac arc that led you into that state of kavalya, isolated unity, you have as well a cycle that takes you out of and builds new formations, transformations, eudaimonia, states of beneficial consciousness which become part of your permanent repertoire. If you will, it becomes part of your causal virtue. And on the way down, that one-ment is seen as vidya, in which the immeasurable is experienced. In gnosis, the indivisible of Advaiti Vadi, gnosis, is attained. And that is total attunement. at that spiritual level through your intuitive senses. At the psychical level of the soul, the alignment takes place where you as an ego are experiencing probably the best happiness you've ever had in your life in terms of balancing the divine with the creaturely, the immaterial with the material, the infinite with the finite, as a transfinite being. And so you experience that eusychia in the adjustment of your entire sevenfold apparatus, if you will, all the way from your will, atmic level, all the way down to your physical level. And that is the attainment, which we call parousia. So then, in life, every moment becomes a moment of opportunity to actualize something new and something important, because you understand that in the virtue verse, you're using your conscience as a virtue selector in order to convect that to the rest of the world. But you are first of all as a spirit projecting that from ultimate virtue, which is the complete freedom from non-virtuous states of being, that is limiting states of being, that are not going to allow you the freedom to be harmonic with the pattern, which is ever present and which is part of what we interpret as the evolutionary unfoldment, not only of the species, not only of the planet, but of the individual. So here, there are certain natural virtues. The psychonaut learns to identify these. We referred to them, they're virtues by nature. We referred to them earlier. They're the blissful states of consciousness, the enoia. They're naturally virtuous contents of consciousness, or noia, such things as clarity and calmness and generosity, your intellectual virtues such as vigilance and curiosity, penetrative investigation, as well as things like what St. Paul mentions as the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. What these do is lift the individual off so that when natural virtue is practiced in parousia, in the awakened consciousness, then the mind, which can accommodate anything, has associated virtue. The virtuous main mind through associated virtuous mental states and factors. This allows the individual mind, which now is associated with natural virtue, to seed itself as a causal virtue. We indicated that before, and that's the performative potentiation. That's where you're planting positive seeds in your own conscience. That's what virtue is, the growing of those seeds that are natural virtues for future wholesome results. It's self-mastery and the control of choice. This is what we referred to earlier. So that causal virtue then becomes a motivated virtue. They're virtues by motivation in the sense that your conduct directly reflects the virtues that were naturally arrived at through your own discovery, that you associated in your mind, that you planted as seeds so it becomes causal virtue, and that therefore takes hold and is able to flow through the body as motivated virtue. And then in the real world of local karma, the life world in which you are embedded organically with everything you see, think, do, and feel, and react to, including social media, including your own meditative mind. This is part of the Modi mandala. This is part of what is your awakened self, and it allows you to be creatively virtuous. That is, an awakened individual to make a meaningful, significant, valuable impact upon the world, and therefore lifting yourself off of what we referred to as the ausikros, which is the causal, antithetical, temporal, and spatial existence that we all know in terms of time, space, entity, and causality, in which, as an intuiting, self-conscious individual, we have the powers of thinking, feeling, doing, and willing. These are things that are here within our very nature as conscious beings. That is ousia. Ousia is being. The ausikros is the cross that we bear as conscious being. We are always intuiting. What are we intuiting? Whatever we're thinking, feeling, doing, or willing. And then, of course, as the psychonaut, the pilgrim, learns to transmute the base metal, so to speak, into the refined pure gold of consciousness, they lift themselves off the ausikros into the parousia of eudaimonia, happiness, where wisdom, love, care, and virtue predominate, and utilizing the various collections of merit that we've called goodness, power, beauty, and truth. The individual who's attained those parousic parameters do so basically by abiding in the green zone that I was referring to earlier, saying that the octahedron, where you become the hero and the lover and the leader and the seer, is connected from the eschaton, that is these accumulated virtues that are forever endurances in transfinity, and the actual concrete end of the octahedron down here in materiality. It all becomes part of this green zone of awakened consciousness. These are parousic abodes in which the adept abides, and these have been part of tradition for many, many, many centuries, and if history indicates anything correctly, it would be for several millennia. If you ever studied Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and you look at Samadhipada Sutra 33, he lists there the 4 basic virtues or abodes, which are taken from classic Indian philosophy, Hindu philosophy, and utilized by the Buddhist under the terms of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. I add to it the 5th, unity. And that's where all 4 states are interconnected and actively being cultivated by the conscious pilgrim as they perform this perfusion that transforms their being into parousia, into this living sense of caring and kindness in the world, and wisdom and virtue, etc. So the abodes are actually what we've already talked about in terms of the precious resource, the Sambhogakaya. That particular aspect of your psychical being, the green zone, where you consider, and what do you consider? You consider kindness. Somebody else is happy. If they're happy, and then you cultivate friendliness to their happiness. If they're suffering, you cultivate compassion for their misery. If they're having great joy in their life and success and wealth and fame and good fortune, you have sympathetic joy for that. You don't have some begrudging sense that they have something that you shouldn't. And toward vice, you cultivate indifference, the way that you would cultivate gladness to anybody who displayed virtue. So you behold them as they are when you cultivate gladness. You behold the virtue as it is. And when it comes to joy, you're beholding what? You are beholding somebody else's harmonic state of being, and you are completely at one with that. In the way that you are at one in terms of mercy and sympathy with someone who is suffering. And your basic idea here is, I'm here to help you during your time of sorrow. In the same way, you might well have said, I'm a friend to your happiness, when you see somebody having a happy time in life. Altogether, whether it's friendliness, compassion, gladness, indifference, you're cultivating composure towards the world. And I utilize Erich Fromm's ideas of what love actually is to tie this together, because the Western perspective is interwoven with the East in terms of creating a corpus callosum of consciousness in our theoretic apparatus in terms of what we apprehend connotatively in terms of meaning. Fromm says love is 4 things, right? Care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge. And I broke these down here into where you can see care, knowledge, respect, and responsibility. These are underlined. And here, the 5th, divine abiding. And that's to actually rejoice. And I use the word joy and keep the old configuration of letters, because I want to underscore the fact that it is an actual rejoicing that takes place within consciousness. And through that rejoicing, we've talked about you attain balance. And that balance is with the universal spinning top. All of being is spinning around all about us. And each of us has an axis. And whether it's from the aeonal level all the way up through where I am, through the cognal intuitive level, where I am that, down through the egoic or the soul level, where I exist, and then where me exists as thoughts, emotions, a body. This is me. We all have that sense of empiricality, that is the finitude of our self-existence. That is the me. And it is always the me which is the external representation of the I. The I generates the me. The self-consciousness generates the thoughts, the feelings, the actions, and the will. These are not things that just arise on their own. They are pinned to a self, if you will. It was customary for me throughout these sessions of Selfology 101, which, remember, is just a large overview of the subject of the self. I usually started with some famous quotes. Well, today we are going to end with some quotations in terms of the self as PAROUSIA. That is the perfected. And first we'll quote from a Taoist master, Chuang Tzu. And he says, if having reached this human form is joyous, how much greater is the joy of knowing that after countless incarnations, we can look forward to the infinite. Accepting life as it comes, one can reach that source which lies behind all changing phenomena. In our next session, which will be session 9 on Selfology 101, we are going to speak of the synergy of self, and that's where we will tap into the source to all of this and how it creates, through unfolding and enfolding, the vortex of being that we experience. In the Nag Hammadi library, there is a treasure for Gnostic Christians That is the Sophia, the wisdom of Jesus Christ. And in the 52nd volume, we pull this quote. Whoever knows him, capital H, in perfect knowledge, will rest in him who has no beginning and no end. Yahshua, transliterated as Jesus through the Anglican linguistic route, said, I and my Father are one. And that's very reminiscent of Aham Brahmasmi, which is I am Brahman from the Upanishads. But essentially what happens in PAROUSIA is that the individual has awakened permanently from being a victim of being, ousia, to becoming a victor in PAROUSIA, of taking being and maximizing it from its potential. And so we'll leave, for the time being, on a note that we started with Buddha Raja, who talks about the way to attain this parousic, perfusive state. He says the method of attaining the goal is to be constantly awake to one's own awareness. By this means, the sage achieves the state free of differentiation. There is no other method other than staying with awareness of one's own being, closely maintaining of this alone. The yogi will become joyful, resting in the self. So, my friends, until next time, behave when you must, be good whenever you can, but above all else, be yourself.